that each successive generation is not going to have to worry about poverty. Education's always going to be taken care of. They're always going to have a roof over their head, and they can start working at the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren level without having to accumulate more money. Hi, Jeff Marsacci, the Plain English Attorney, and welcome to the video. Today we're going to talk about generational wealth forever and how you can actually do this. Now, it's kind of important to state up front that not a lot of people actually want to do this. They don't have that kind of foresight to think beyond the kids and then the grandkids so that the successive generations, the great-grandkids on down that they may never even meet, end up having a substantial amount of wealth that's put aside so that their lives are kind of on easy mode. At the same time, they're not spoiled brats who never have to work a day in their life. So this is a strategy that will appeal to a few people, but it's not necessarily going to be everybody. And look, that's fine. Most of my clients, when they're doing estate planning, they want to care and provide for the people that they care about, which is family, kids, grandkids, but not the descendants that they will never meet. So if you fit into this particular category, great. If you don't, no big deal. Second thing I want to say before we jump into it, this can end up needing not just an attorney, but an accountant and a financial advisor, and maybe even some other professionals to really look at the whole overall picture. Now, the other potential professionals could actually be a separate attorney that's focused on business law. And that's because a lot of the clients that have expressed an interest in this type of planning, they have large businesses, and not necessarily one, but several. And there's a lot of those clients that have that desire to reach down through the ages to those successive descendants that they're never going to meet. They have a lot of real estate. And so that's the second thing we got to talk about is you need all of those other professionals. If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel. Third thing that we really have to keep a focus on is there aren't a ton of states that allow this. There are enough, and each has different rules because most states have a cutoff for something called the rule against perpetuities. I'm not going to attempt to explain all of that. That might be a good subject for another video down the road, or there are probably other creators out there who have something on the rule against perpetuities. But let's just say, okay, there is a cutoff in the law that goes over whether or not a trust has to finally expel the assets and give it up to the beneficiaries, and then they can do whatever they want with it. This really does kind of come about because there were some very wealthy families that wanted everything tied up forever, including land and real estate. If you think real estate prices are bad now, imagine if back in, say, the 1920s and 30s, there were these very wealthy families. They bought up all the land, kept it in trust, and never wanted to let it go. That would mean there was so much less land. Say 80% of the land got eaten up. There's only 20% of the land out there. That's going to be extremely expensive. So that's why this rule is in place. Now, for North Carolina, our rule against perpetuities, you can keep wealth in a trust forever, but you can't mandate that real estate has to be held in trust forever. All right, so I'm going to comment on this last piece up front, that this is actually a client that we're working on something for right now. They want to know some of the basics, so it's with them in mind that I realize this is going to be a good topic overall. So let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, so if you're doing any of this type of planning, it's an estate plan. But gosh, it's the slam dunk. You do not want to do this with the last will and testament and have everything go through probate. Most of the time when my clients are looking at this type of long-term strategy, they already have to worry about estate taxes, which at this point for an individual would be about more than $13 million in 2023, more than $26 million in 23 for a married couple. If you're at that point and you're going to go and do this with a will, that's really meaning something like 5% of that is just going to get sucked up by attorneys and probate fees and other stuff that's just not, it's not necessary, nor should it be looked at with any kind of seriousness. Go right to the revocable living trust. So the revocable living trust is what you're setting up. That's going to be the estate piece of your plan. It's going to be there to avoid probate. It's going to be there to keep stuff from going into a potential guardianship or conservatorship if you become incapacitated. All that's handled through the living trust. Now we have a perpetual legacy trust that's going to be the recipient of the wealth. Right, so the recipient of the wealth. So once it goes down to the next generation, you've passed on, assets are going to go into this legacy trust, and this is what's going to kind of go on forever. So let's take a look at what exactly does that look like. So in this perpetual legacy trust, the wealth is held in trust forever, consistent with state law. In some states, like I said, some states allow it, others don't. Some have some limitations. My clients generally want the wealth available to all of the descendants in the discretion of the trustee with some guidelines in place, a mix of both. What they're not doing is at, say, the grandchild level saying, here you go, take these millions of dollars and do what you want with it. That defeats the purpose of it being perpetual. This is a way to kind of set things up if you just want to do a revocable living trust with some asset management trusts. So it guarantees to go down to the grandkids. That's a lot more common than this. But with the perpetual legacy trust, we're talking about holding that wealth forever. Often these legacy trusts have terms that prevent the descendants from not working at all, or at least they have to be productive members of society in charitable or nonprofit circles. They've got to be doing something. So this is actually a really good quote, and it really does apply. You want to give them enough money that they can do anything that they want, but not enough money that they can do nothing. That's really what we're talking about here. If you're looking down to the great-grandchild and even successive generations, and it would be fantastic if they were, quote, captains of industry and building up their own businesses and building up their own wealth. But also, there are a lot of my clients that are thinking, well, look, if we've generated that much wealth and they're taken care of, I would love it if some great or great-great-grandchildren are going to become the philanthropists of that time, that they're going to dedicate their lives to working in nonprofits, to working within whatever social circles they are in, whatever, especially if they've got enough wealth to be in those higher echelons, and help really create some positive change in the world. They would love it. What most of my clients don't want is for their great-great-grandchildren to be able to just sit on their butts and do absolutely nothing. That's not what this is about. All right, so there's often educational guidance, because it becomes really important for my clients that they want their kids to have some kind of education. They don't necessarily have to be very specific about the types and kinds, but usually they do talk about degrees. They want at least a 4-year college education, and there's incentives put in place for master's and higher degrees. So, okay, that's a very common thing to want. And sometimes there's also a charitable board within this perpetual legacy trust that the descendants are allowed to participate in, and there may already be in place some other kind of separate family foundation. So this is a way that they can kind of work together so that you've got the perpetual legacy trust. If it's growing and it's investing and there's a lot of income, well, okay, that income needs to be taxed. So a lot of times my clients may put into this legacy trust 50% of the income, not the growth. 50% of the income that's going to be taxed has to go to charity. It doesn't necessarily have to specify exactly which ones. And in fact, this is the opportunity to help the descendants learn more about being productive in society and helping society, where all of the descendants have an opportunity to be on the charitable board. that directs where that income, where that 50% goes, but it has to be to a 501c3 or similarly exempt charity or several charities, or in whole or in part to this family foundation. Very typically, just to make sure there aren't any potential rules down the road changing things where, oh, it has to go to this family foundation, it has to go specifically to this one from the legacy trust. Up at the revocable trust level, if you want stuff to go to a specific charity, that's fine. But we're talking about 150 years from now that maybe there's this huge amount of income that needs to go to a charity. The IRS may be changing the rules. Oh, this became really popular. It's going to mandate it has to go to these 501c3s. No, let the charitable board decide. Let them make those kind of decisions. So that's something that's very, very advised. If you're going to have a charitable board, let them make the decisions. And you can have charitable board meetings once a year, really give an overview of what's been going on and where the money's being spent. Fantastic idea that some of my clients already have in place with their perpetual legacy trusts. So let's go ahead and jump a little bit ahead. And what we're going to do is see how does this actually work and what some of the different options are. So you've got the revocable living trust. You can simply have all or most of the assets go down to that perpetual legacy trust. So you've accumulated the wealth. It's in the revocable living trust. The revocable living trust for a couple in particular can really double up their estate tax exemptions so that we're not talking about losing money at estate taxes at another level. That's revocable trust planning 101 for taxes. Have it just go down to the perpetual legacy trust. The other potential in this strategy is gifting money during life so that you are having it come from you or from the assets that are in your revocable living trust and moving it into the perpetual legacy trust. Fantastic strategy. But here's the big thing to keep in mind. Once the assets go from your revocable trust or you into that perpetual legacy trust, it's kind of then cut off. That legacy trust is now irrevocable once money hits it. So you can't make any changes at that point. So this is why I do have a client or two where they've got the trust set up. They've got that intention, but they're not ready to start moving money in. They're still in the process of building up their wealth. It's still at the revocable trust level. They want to be able to make changes, and that's very understandable. A lot of my clients want to be able to change and amend and update these documents prior to them passing on. But that's the one thing. Once the money goes in, that's it. That trust becomes irrevocable. So with the estate tax rules potentially changing at the very end of 2025, well, not potentially, they're going to change unless something happens and Congress acts. They're thinking about using some of their estate tax exemptions and gifting huge amounts into this perpetual legacy trust now, getting it out of their estate now, so that when the rules change, it's not like they gave up and lost some of these credits. So they are thinking about doing these large gifts and applying those estate tax credits. But as you'll see a little bit later on, there are other types of credits that we have to be very aware of and cognizant of in this process. And that is generation skipping tax exemptions. So what exactly are these generation skipping tax exemptions? Basically, it's all set up with federal taxation that whatever you own and control is subject to estate taxes. But there were some very wealthy families that were considering when all of this legislation was going on, oh, well, we're used to just leaving everything to the oldest son. I mean, we're going back towards around World War I in that time period. That was still kind of common. Yeah, we're leaving everything to the oldest son, and then he'll take care of the siblings and even the aunts and uncles and whatnot. And the family started saying, well, wait a minute. What if we leave it to the oldest grandson? We're skipping an entire level of taxes by jumping over the kids and going right to the grandkid. Congress said, no. If you skip that generation, we're going to slap a 55% tax on top of whatever the estate tax is, but we're going to have some exemptions. Thing is, those exemptions mean that you can skip over multiple generations if you apply the tax credits. So that's where these generation skipping tax credits come into play. You have to apply them to the money that's going into this perpetual legacy trust so it can keep going and stay in trust forever without getting taxed for estate taxes as each generation passes on. So we typically build in a mechanism inside the trust so that if it's got generation skipping taxes, okay, the exemptions get applied, it's in one bucket, and then we've got another kind of just in case backup bucket that, okay, if there aren't enough generation skipping tax credits applied, okay, it goes in here, and now it's got to get distributed out to the beneficiaries. All right. So you have to apply those generation skipping tax exemptions, whether it's when you pass on or it's going through large gifts or both. Now, I mentioned that I do have a lot of clients that are involved in business, and sometimes a family limited partnership becomes a great way to end up overseeing the entire business, limiting the liability a little bit further by having an extra layer of protection around it. But you can gift away limited shares at a kind of discounted rate. I got a video on family limited partnerships. Go ahead and check it out. And I'm going to try to remember to put a link to that in the description. So with the family limited partnership, okay, you can gift those family limited partnership shares down to that legacy trust. And that can be a big thing. But okay, potential issues. Well, in addition to, let me go back there. In addition to in the gifting of those shares, you do have to also apply the generation skipping tax exemptions. But here's a potential issue. If you have property inside, like limited liability companies, so these individual limited liability companies, so you've got real estate, there's a mortgage or there's financing on it, and you've signed off and the bank or whatever institution is fine with lending the money, and you've got this, okay, great. But now if you put it into a family limited partnership, suddenly there might be an issue with the financing. Oh, wait a minute, you can't transfer that. And then the other part is, oh, you're going to start gifting away ownership. So now it's not just you who signed on the dotted line. Whoa, wait a minute. We want all of our money now. We're afraid of this. When you start getting into some very high values, you're going to commercial lenders, you may be able to just explain all of this, but you got to walk them through it. And believe me, there's going to be a lot more personal guarantees if you're doing it this way. But it is a potential way to do it, but you just got to be aware of that. All right, so next, here's another strategy that can be used so that you're getting some value down to the kids at that level. But it's also going to end up going down to the perpetual legacy trust in a way that's going to kind of give it a little bit of a turbocharge so that the money that's going into the legacy trust can get a huge kickstart. So by the time it's down to the great-grandchildren, it's going to be phenomenal in the amount of wealth that you can generate. So you've got the perpetual legacy trust. You've got 3 kids. Okay, we've got the asset management trusts. So you're going to potentially max out your generation skipping tax exemptions with everything that's going from you at your level down to the legacy trust. And what's left over is going into these asset management trusts for each kid. So it gets divided up that way. And again, we got to be cognizant of estate taxes all along here. But now, written into the asset management trust, or at least there's an understanding with the trustee, here's what they're going to do. They're going to get life insurance on each of the kids in their own asset management trust. And so now this insurance is going to really grow what's going into the perpetual legacy trust when the kids pass on, and they're applying their generation skipping tax exemptions. So what we've managed to do here, if you've got enough money going into those asset management trusts and you've got the life insurance on the kids, and it goes down into that perpetual legacy trust. Now you're using not just you or you and a spouse's generation skipping tax exemptions and maxing them out or getting close to it. Now there's 5. So instead of 2 people's wealth worth of generation skipping taxes, it's 5 at the kids level. So by the time it's in there for the grandkids, you may have more than enough that it's kind of doing what you want it to do, that each successive generation is not going to have to worry about poverty. Education's always going to be taken care of. They're always going to have a roof over their head, and they can start working at the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren level without having to accumulate more money. They can start doing what they need to do and potentially start working in nonprofits and charities and building their own businesses and having this trust as a fallback. So it happens a lot more quickly. All right, so there's also an irrevocable life insurance trust. Now, let me comment that this is a different way of doing it. Rather than having the insurance go down to the kids and then as a payout and then going down to the next level, you could set up an irrevocable life insurance trust. And we've got videos on that too, on how it can take the life insurance out of the whole equation. So what you can do is, if you purchase with one huge sum of money a big life insurance policy, move it into that irrevocable life insurance trust and use up whatever potential estate transfer taxes and generation skipping tax exemptions that you can for this very large policy. You're moving it into the irrevocable life insurance trust at the value of that life insurance policy today, which, okay, it's about what you're putting the money in, but it's not what the insurance payout value is going to be. So it's going into that irrevocable life insurance trust, and then it goes down with all of those applications. Now it's going into, from the irrevocable life insurance trust into the perpetual legacy trust with those generation skipping tax exemptions being used. So that's exempt money in addition to whatever you're leaving from the revocable trust and applying whatever generation skipping tax exemptions may be left there. Or it can free you up to put in a little bit more for the kids. But again, what you're doing is you are really leaving the successive generations a huge amount of wealth and money that can continue to go on and on and on. So there's a lot of other things that we can do. We can probably do a little bit more on each of these aspects in a perpetual legacy trust, just to really more fully explain this, or hey, we might even do a whole course on that. But you can have this wealth grow and accumulate forever and keep going down to these successive generations so that everybody's taken care of. No one has to worry about living in poverty. And the kids and grandkids and great-grandkids in particular, and great-great-grand and so on, they're going to be able to help change the world because you put in place a financial legacy that's going to protect them without necessarily making them filthy, stinking rich people who are going to do nothing. They're actually going to be productive. So that's the perpetual legacy trust and how some of these components work together. Like I mentioned, this was specifically for a client that we're working on a case for right now. So some of these aspects may be good. All of these aspects may look good together. But now I'm coming back to one of those first points that I made. All of this sounds fantastic and great and wonderful, but we need to make sure we've got the right professionals. This is something that you want to do. You got to do it right. So there's the attorney putting this stuff together. There's the tax person, an accountant, CPA, who's going to look over all of this in conjunction with the attorney. A financial advisor looking at the different financial things, in particular how the life insurance may end up having to work if that's part of the strategy. And if you're in business, maybe a business law attorney who understands a lot more about the very specifics on this. So all of them working together for you as a team, it's going to have some cost associated with it. But if you're talking about wealth forever, it's probably worth it if that's your goal. So I hope you found that information useful. As I always tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great day.